Story 1: The Voices in the Woods. Several months ago, I decided to hike through a state forest I visit often. I'd been there so many times that it felt like a second home, a place where nothing unusual had ever happened. This forest covers nearly 2,000 acres, with winding trails that snake through dense, untamed woodlands. There are only 2 parking lots, one on the east side and the other on the west. These lots are separated by quite a distance, adding to the forest's seclusion. On that day, I parked in the eastern lot, pleased to see that mine was the only vehicle there. It's not strange to have the place to yourself here. The forest is quiet, hidden from most. That's one of the reasons I enjoy it so much. With my dog by my side, I set off down a familiar trail, savoring the stillness. The woods were calm, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves beneath my feet and the occasional chirp of a bird. About 6 miles in, I reached a riverbed that intersected the trail. The soft murmur of the flowing water drew me in, and I decided to follow it deeper into the forest, leaving the beaten path behind. As we wandered farther, the trees grew thicker, their branches forming a canopy that let in only sparse shafts of light. After around 3 more miles, we found ourselves in a deep valley, surrounded by nothing but towering trees and the quiet rush of the river. Then I heard it, a faint sound like a conversation in the distance. I stopped straining my ears, but the forest had fallen silent. The murmuring voices seemed to fade in and out, as though drifting on the wind. I brushed it off as my imagination, figuring there was no reason anyone else would be out here. This wasn't a popular trail, and the seclusion was almost absolute. Yet the faint voices lingered in my mind. As I continued walking, reaching the base of a steep hill, I decided to climb it to get a better view of the area. It was challenging, and my dog followed, matching my every step up the rugged incline. When we finally reached a flat area at the top, I took a moment to rest on a large rock, catching my breath. Sitting in silence, I felt a strange unease. Then I heard the voices again. They were closer this time, like they were coming from just around the bend in the hillside. But I couldn't understand any words, just the low muffled sound of conversation. My heart pounded, dread settling in my stomach. I was certain I was alone in this forest. The parking lot had been empty. The trails were deserted. Whoever was out here would have heard me coming long before, as every step on the dry leaves and twigs sounded as loud as a thunderclap. Suddenly the voices stopped, vanishing as abruptly as they had begun. The chill washed over me, and I decided it was time to leave. I hurried down the hill, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of movement. Once I reached the riverbed, I felt a bit safer, but then I heard something else. The voices were back, only this time they were different, eerier. Instead of talking, they seemed to be howling, a strange wolf-like cry that echoed through the trees, following me as I made my way back to the trail. The cries continued, growing fainter as I neared the edge of the forest, yet they lingered in my mind, chilling me to my core. When I finally made it back to my car, the parking lot was still empty, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I got in and drove away. But to this day, I can still hear those voices in my mind, howling in the heart of that silent forest. Story to the shadow in the campsite. I was around 15 when I had an experience that still haunts me. As a scout, I'd been camping numerous times, but this one night, on a remote hill in the Wicklow Mountains, turned everything upside down. The hill known as Large Hill was said to be haunted by the ghostly figure of a woman, whom the locals called the Lady of Large Hill. Forest Scout leaders enjoyed telling tales about her, saying she wandered the forest at night, searching for someone or something lost to time. The campsite was secluded, surrounded by dense woods and towering hills. The parking lot was a good walk away, and once the sun went down, the only light came from our campfire or flashlights. We were in the field, farthest from the campsite entrance, near the thick woods, and the night was pitch black. Earlier that evening, I'd had an argument with my best friend over something trivial. When I later asked her to walk with me to the bathrooms, she kept her distance, sulking as she walked about 6 feet ahead of me. The path to the bathrooms took us past the mess tent, where a dim light hung outside, casting a soft glow on the surrounding area. I was focused on the ground, avoiding stray roots in camping gear, when I noticed a shadow on my left, moving just a few feet behind me. I assumed it was another girl, joining us on the walk to the bathroom. Turning around though, I saw no one, but the shadow remained. A dark outline resembling a girl with long hair, in what looked like a nightgown. Confused and a bit unsettled, I looked over at my friend's shadow and then at my own. But this other shadow didn't fit. It seemed to be coming from nowhere. The only light source was to our right, meaning our shadows stretched out to the left. But the shadow had no source, almost as if it were independent of any physical form. I tried to brush it off, but an icy chill settled over me. I walked faster, closing the gap between my friend and me. As we reached the path leading to the bathrooms, we turned on our flashlights, hoping the light would dispel whatever was lurking behind us. But even with the lights on, the unsettling feeling didn't fade. We moved quickly, barely speaking, bar nerves on edge when we finally reached the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall, trembling as I tried to shake off the fear. The walk back to the tent was worse. Every rustle in the bushes, every crunch underfoot seemed amplified in the silence. Back at the tent, I lay in my sleeping bag, wide awake, replaying the encounter in my mind. To this day, when people ask if I've had a paranormal experience, I tell them about the shadow that walked beside me, with no source, no reason, but a presence I felt deep in my bones. Story 3: The Camp Intruder. A few years back, 2 friends and I decided to play paintball in the Appalachian wilderness. We turned the day into a camping trip, hoping for a peaceful night under the stars. After a full day of paintball, but when we reached the usual campsite, it was packed with a church group, with no other familiar sights available. We decided to venture deeper into the forest, to find a spot which led us onto a narrow, rocky path miles from civilization. After an hour of driving, we found a clearing by a creek, with a plywood table nailed to a tree, and tarps strung between branches. The setup looked abandoned, yet unsettling, as if someone had left in a hurry. Ignoring the feeling, we set up camp and began cooking chili. It was almost midnight when we noticed a faint, unnatural glow from a hill a quarter-mile away. The light was steady but too weak to be moonlight. Curiosity, and perhaps the courage granted by rum and cokes, led 2 of us, Jacob and me, to investigate. We noticed something odd as we approached. The bark was stripped in rings around the trunks of nearby trees, like some unknown creature had chewed through them. Half-jokingly, we spoke of a ghost beaver, trying to keep our spirits up. Just as Jacob stumbled and swore loudly, the light on the hill vanished, snuffing out as if in response to our presence. Our laughter died, replaced by an instinctual fear. Silently we made our way back, avoiding the use of flashlights, letting our eyes adjust to the dim moonlight. But when we were nearly back at the campsite, we saw someone. Isaac, our friend who had stayed behind, was walking around the site, a dark hood pulled up, his paintball gear clutched in his hands. It struck us as odd. Why would he be carrying his gear? As we got closer, Isaac approached us from the opposite direction. Down the road, he was unsteady, mumbling about having another drink by the fire. My blood ran cold as I realized what that meant. If Isaac had just walked up, who was the figure we saw wandering our campsite? We barely packed bar tent. Sleeping bags and gear were left scattered. As we jumped into the truck, starting the engine, we caught a glimpse of something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier from earlier moved to bar our escape. Somehow, something or someone had been watching us all along. Thank you all for listening. Camping can be thrilling, but remember, the forest hides things we may never understand. Stay safe, and until next time.